I am really, really, second really is in caps, over my ego. He is the guest that never leaves, the mosquito that keeps buzzing around in my ear, and the heartburn that ruins a good thali dinner. Why do we have to be friends? In all of the spiritual literature, of all of the different traditions that I know of, that I've read from so many different lineages and religions and cultures, there's several things that are really common to them. And one of them is the ego, the mind. And how that ego mind gets into our hearts, into our lives, making itself literally that uninvited guest that never leaves, that mosquito in your ear. So it's not just present, but it's always hitting you. The dilemma arises in what we do about it. And there's a lot of traditions in which you hear and you read things about annihilating the ego. So that word is used a lot, annihilating the ego, or, conquering the ego, all of these very warlike terms. And on the one hand, yeah, that's the goal, is to be the victor over the ego. If you've got the you who knows, the you who's deeply grounded and connected, the true you. And then you've got this false self, the ego. The ego, by the way, as long as we're talking about it, the ego is not as simple as just our arrogance. A lot of people think of ego just as arrogance. Oh, you think you're so great, you have a lot of ego. Okay, so that's one aspect of the ego. One reflection of the ego is people who think they're so great. But people who walk around as the victim all the time have just as much of an ego problem. The same ego tells me I'm the best or I'm the worst. The same ego tells me I'm always right. I'm the smartest one. I'm the one who knows. As the same ego that says, oh God, I'm so stupid. I'm so embarrassed. I make such a fool of myself. Nobody likes me. That's also ego. The ego is anything that sticks you in a box, closes the box and puts a label on it and writes, it's like you go to the airport and you have a box and they say, all right, ma'am, what's in the box? And they stick a label. Is it fragile? Is it not fragile? And send it on the way. The ego is what does that to you. The ego sticks you in a box. And sometimes it's a box that says, I'm so great, so smart, I'm the best, I'm the smartest, I'm the one who knows everything. But sometimes it's a box that's, I'm the worst, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I'm a horrible person. That's also ego. The ego is the one who tells you a story about yourself. Nothing good ever happens to me. That's ego. I'm always the one who does all the work. I'm always the one who puts myself out. I'm the nicest, I'm the most giving, and I'm always the one who gets the short end of the stick. It's ego. Anytime you hear a voice in your head telling you a story about yourself, that's ego. And it's important to know that, because for those of us where the story is not, oh, you're the best, we might think that maybe we don't have such a problem with our ego. But if you've got any preconceived, boxed notion of who you are, that's ego. And it gets even really deep. If, for example, let's say that in your life something bad has happened to you. You were abused. Your parents had a horrible divorce. You suffered in some very traumatic sort of way. And now, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 60 years later, you are moving through the world identified as the one who was the victim of the abuse, the divorce, the trauma, the suffering. That's ego. So the ego actually is quite versatile. It's able to fit almost an infinite number of containers, to mask itself as an infinite number of things. A lot of the drama that we go through in our life, oh my God, this and that, is ego. It's the story that the ego is telling us. I'll give you a personal story to illustrate what I mean by that. So when I had been in India for maybe about a month, Pujya Swamiji was approached by the head of an organization that was financially managing 10 or 11 schools in a big slum area. And he came to Pujya Swamiji and said, we've been running these schools in the slums, but we no longer have money to do it. And if you would adopt the schools, that would be really wonderful. And they're not in good shape. I mean, A, they're in slums, but B, the schools themselves, this one doesn't have a roof and it's the rainy season. This one has no flooring. This one has no electricity, and but every day, kids show up. And every day a teacher shows up. And so we really don't want to close them down if you can come and maybe adopt them. So he said, sure, let me come and see them. And he said to me, do you want to come? Sure, of course. Those of you who were here last night knew that I never said no to anything. Whatever it was an adventure. Yes, I wanted to be there. Yes, I was up for it. So we went, spent the whole day. And the scenes were like if you've seen movies of the Indian slums. That's what these slums were. Absolute quintessential slums. People living in, tents that were made out of a little bit of tin and some fabric and a few sheets of plywood and, string and whatever. Cooking outside on gas while a goat lies right there, exactly movie quintessential slums. But the children were so beautiful. 23 years later, I cry every time I talk about them. And we spend the whole day there, and we get back in the night, back to our ashram in Delhi, and I'm crying, I'm sobbing. I just spent my whole day seeing now hundreds of kids living in squalor, but with such devotion to their country, to their education. I mean, you walk up to one of these little slum schools that's nothing, but outside it are all these, falling apart plastic little chappals, slippers, because to the kids, this is a holy place. Right? I mean, to me, it looks like a shack. To them, it's a temple. It's a holy place. So, of course, their shoes come off before they go inside. So we come back. I'm sobbing. And I say, I can't eat dinner. Pujya Swamiji says, why can't you eat dinner? I said, I can't eat dinner because these kids, my God, they don't have anything. How can I eat if they don't have anything? And I'm sobbing and sobbing. And he looks at me, and very matter-of-factly he says, Are your tears helping them? No, of course they're not, but oh my God, those kids, and my story. And he looks at me and he says, your tears are only helping yourself. He said, you feel like such a compassionate person that you can't eat your food because those poor children don't have anything. He said, but you're not actually helping them. He said, if you actually want to do something other than just be in your own drama, eat your dinner, go to sleep, get up at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning and figure out where you're going to raise the money so that we can sponsor all of these schools. And for me, that was my very first teaching of another face of ego. Here I was, not feeling great. Actually, I was feeling miserable. I was feeling so undeserving of everything we had. But the ego wears the mask also of our drama. Here I am sobbing with what I thought was compassion. It's a story. It's drama. I'm the good, compassionate one who can't sleep because these kids don't have anything. And I'm going to stay awake all night sobbing, feeling really good about myself that I'm sobbing, that I'm so compassionate. I'll write letters home, telling my family and friends about those poor children. I'll cry on the letters and I'll say, pardon the wet marks. I'm crying. And that's the drama. But you can see where it doesn't actually get you anywhere. It doesn't actually help them. It's not actually rooted in any sort of reality of my oneness with them that would impel me to act. So I share the story because it helps to have some ideas of what the faces of the ego can look like. And so for me, on a very personal level, on my spiritual journey, path unfolding, river of grace, the analogies of annihilation and conquering have never been analogies that worked very well for me. Because the ego always felt to me so much like a part of how I identified, that even though I knew it was wrong, in the big scheme of truth and untruth, who I am, the truth is soul, spirit, consciousness, divinity. The wrong, the untruth, is the whole story of the ego. Born here, that education, this childhood story, this, that, came to India like this, that story. But that was all ego story. But it felt so deeply interwoven with how I identified that every time I tried to annihilate the ego, it felt like I was ripping myself out of myself. In fact, I remember saying to Pujya Swamiji one day, tears streaming down my face, they never told me that when you annihilate my ego, you're going to take my heart with it. And that really is what it feels like sometimes, as the ego starts to lessen its hold on you. But for me, what has worked, hence the fact that I offer it here to you, is rather than the imagery or the thoughts of conquering and annihilation and fighting, and I'm going to ground you into the ground, you bad ego, bad, bad, bad. Well, it's all you. And so at the end of the day, you're going to bed with the loser of that fight. You don't get to say to your ego, all right, you get the couch tonight. Or, all right, fine, keep the bed, I'll take the couch. You're in bed with the loser. There's no way to say that's your side of the bed, this is my side of the bed. Truth on the right, ego on the left. And so what I found was no matter how many battles I engaged in with my ego, at the end of the day, when I lay down to sleep, well, the battleground was my heart. And so I shifted how I started thinking about it. And for me, it's been really a path of expansion. So you've got this unwanted house guest, as we circle back to the actual question. The ego is this uninvited, unwanted house guest. All right, build yourself a bigger house. Rather than getting into a war with somebody who isn't going to walk out your front door, but instead your living room is bloody, your kitchen is bloody. The living room and kitchen you have to live in. Well, imagine that you had the ability, that you had unlimited resources. Just build your house bigger so that the unwanted house guest has taken over your living room. Fine. Build another one. Build a penthouse. Build a home that is so big that the presence of an unwanted guest in one of the rooms isn't something that disturbs your sleep. You're able to coexist because the space has enlarged. And on a spiritual level, we do have unlimited resources. You may not have unlimited money to actually build a physical house bigger, but we do have unlimited spiritual resources because the truth of who we are is infinite. The core of who we are when we say soul, spirit, consciousness, divinity, well, these are borderless words. I'm not 5'3" soul. I'm not 120 pounds worth of soul. Those are my bones and muscles, and soul doesn't have a height and a weight. Soul is infinite. Spirit is infinite. That's why love is infinite. And that's why when we have experiences in which we feel like we expand, experiences of being in love, with a human being, with a sunset, with the stars in the sky, with a tree, with divinity. When we have experiences of even physically being in the ocean, lying down and looking at the stars in the sky, experiences that take us from the physical into the spiritual experience of expansion. Why does that feel so good? Because it takes us into the truth of who we are, which is boundless. It's taking us back to source. So you take water to the top of the tallest building, it comes down. The source of water, the core truth of water is ocean. Fire rises up. Dig a hole 300 feet in the ground, light a fire, it's going to go up. Source of fire is sun. It's always returning to its source. Our source is infinity, boundless. Soul, spirit, consciousness, love, truth. And so every experience that we have that puts us in touch with that feels so good because it is taking us back to the truth of who we are. So, when the ego feels like it's taking over too much of your very small house, expand your awareness of self. Keep expanding. Keep expanding. Such that, yeah, all right, there's this thing called ego, and it's got its own idea of who I am. It's the storyteller. Every palace used to have a jester, right? And the jester would come out in its costumes and give its song and dance drama. But the jester didn't run the palace. No king ever took the court jester and said, I have an idea, you run the show. We coexisted, all right. So the ego's like that. It's the song and dance storyteller, the drama queen. Rather than thinking about annihilating it, because here's the dilemma. When your mind says, all right, now I'm going to annihilate my ego, guess who's eavesdropping? The ego. Right? I mean, it's all there in your mind. So the very part you're trying to annihilate is all up on its guard, is all defensive. It knows the army's against it. And it now does everything it possibly can to prevent its own annihilation naturally. Ever try to just kill an ant or a mosquito? I mean, nothing wants to die. The ant runs away, the mosquito flies away. Nothing wants to die, let alone our very well-developed egos. So don't start telling your mind, I'm going to annihilate him. Just expand the sense of self. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Yeah, he's over there. It's all right. There's enough rooms in this house for the ego to occupy one of them. Just don't coronate him and stick him on the throne. Don't hand him the ATM card. Right? I mean, you don't want to put the ego in charge. But you don't need to bludgeon it. Because remember, it formed as part of a very natural process, in many ways actually for our own good, at a time in our life when that aspect was needed to protect us. So it's not like an enemy virus that you picked up with bad water or something. It's you. It's just not the fullness of you. So expand your identity of self, expand how you think of self. Recognize that there's a room occupied by the ego, that's all right. Just make sure that he doesn't get the keys to the car, doesn't take over the throne, doesn't get the ATM card, and just kind of is being his drama queen over in his corner, playing his story. It only becomes a problem when you hand him the keys. So that for me is what has been a much more successful, personally way of dealing with my own ego. And it's made my days and my nights much more peaceful, because it has stopped making my heart feel like a battleground against a piece of myself. And when you see it coming, when it's out of its room, starts running through the rest of the house, you acknowledge it, but don't pay too much attention. Don't give it what it wants, which is attention. The court jester only wants to put on a show if there's an audience. If no one's paying any attention, it's not going to do its drama so much. So don't try to bludgeon it, but also don't feed it with your attention. Just acknowledge it. All right. Nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Sorry I don't have more time to stay today, and you just go on about whatever you were doing or thinking without allowing the ego to hijack your attention.